Hello, and welcome to The Outcast by Muncie Outreach. My name is Jordan. My pronouns are they, them. Let's go with Rose.
Hi, my name is Rose, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hi, my name is Luke. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them.
Today we have a very special guest on the show with us. He is the visual art and entertainment curator at the historic Madam Walker Legacy Center. This Indianapolis native is on an art council of Indianapolis from 2020 to 2021. They are a peacekeeper and peacemaker, a very wonderful published poet, Devon, Ginn. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to talk with us.
Absolutely. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you so much, Jordan.
We're diving in deep today, okay? What was your first encounter with homophobia and racism, and how did that affect your art?
So, my personal experiences with homophobia and racism, it's interesting because I've noticed that it's really just 2 pages of the same book, but they've been completely separate instances. I remember very vividly living on Spruce Street in Fountain Square here in Indianapolis, and there was a no parking sign that was right in the middle of the block, and my mom would always give me the guidance and say, okay, go to that particular sign, don't go any further. On that street, Girls Inc., which is now the church within, is located there, but I was only told to I was only able to go there to the peace sign and then back home. Back and forth. It was my daily routine in the summer, anytime after school, once I finished my homework. And I remember very vividly, little 8-year-old Devon was just minding his own business, going to the peace sign and then coming right back. And somebody called me the N-word. And it was interesting because I wasn't sure how to react. I was always told, be respectful to cops, do the yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am thing. And this instance was nothing I was prepared for. My parents as Black folk, they try to prepare us for these instances, and I was just given no guidance. And I was like, what do I do? What? You're an N-word too. It was weird. I didn't understand what was going on. And I also am so accustomed to the N-I-G-G-A, nigga. Like that's what I grew up with. I'm like, you said it wrong, sir. Like, come back, let me help you. It was just a really, really weird experience. And then with homophobia, I haven't experienced that. Honestly, like I've got to really think back, because it might be pride and walking down the street and then somebody just yelling slurs from a car, but I don't think I've ever been directly targeted as a homosexual. And I've got to acknowledge my privilege in kind of being a mask presenting non-binary human being. This is just the level of privilege that I've been gifted. And I call it a gift because I try to use that privilege as much as I can, recognizing that I need to do the greater good. But they've been 2 totally separate instances. Being called the N-word and understanding this is more or less bigotry and less systemic racism. They're 2 totally separate entities right there, while also recognizing, my homophobia and what I experienced as homophobia kind of popped up as happenstance. I happened to be at a Pride event. I happened to be surrounded by queer affirming folk. And it was a group of us, so who knew where it was directed. So I do have to acknowledge my privilege with that.
Yeah, I get that too, because I am a somewhat masculine presenting non-binary person too, and I barely get called out in the street, and I'm so lucky for that. But it's awful for people who exactly can't.
I don't mean to interrupt the conversation or anything, but you mentioned that there's a difference between systemic racism and bigotry. I was wondering if you'd like to clarify that, both for us and anyone who might be listening to our podcast.
Absolutely. So oftentimes people will conflate racism with somebody who's not Black using the N-word, saying nigger with a hard ER. And that's not where it starts. That's not where it stops. We've got the transatlantic slave trade. and recognizing where that started and where we are today with police brutality, there's a major, major difference. Bigotry is somebody just being a hater, like in real life, just being a straight up hater, not wanting anything to do with the quote unquote opposing party, whereas there's an insidious nature to systemic racism, and it's in our laws, it's in the policies that have been written. It exists everywhere. It's pervasive, especially here. It's so pervasive in the United States that other countries have used our racism, our racist execution of how we operate throughout the system, and modeled it for their own governments. And it's interesting, folks will say, I'm not racist. You'll get a quote unquote ally that'll say, I'm not racist at all. Whereas there are certain things that they've been able to experience that have given them not only privilege, but put them in a position of power over folks who look like me.
Yeah. I hate it when I hear people say that, like, oh, I'm not racist. Like, just because it's like when you benefit from racism, even if you're not aware of it, you're going to be racist to some extent. And trying to separate yourself from the problem makes it so you can't address that problem with yourself. Like, I hate that.
That's right. And there's a level of, like I said, privilege that comes with having to reckon with that. It's dirty work, unpacking racism. It's dirty work for allies and folks who look like me. I mean, it wasn't until 2011 that I, as a Black person, understood the difference between systemic racism and bigotry, and recognizing that difference. So it's like if somebody who's lived this Black experience is confused, who's lived a Black ass experience is confused, it's interesting to think that folks just kind of like have this succinct idea of what it means to be racist. And it's like, you have no idea. You've got no clue.
Yeah. It also is just like, because it's so deeply embedded in our society, like there's so many different ways that racism pops up. And it's not just calling someone a slur. It's just, yeah.
I know me and Rose had a conversation last night, actually, about when we were younger, we all had to take different tests. And the some of the rules for the writing portion was no slang or jargon is allowed. And I thought that we both thought that was interesting. We both thought it kind of disabled black kids because who grew up with that type of language, and just non-English speakers who aren't used to using proper English either. And they're geared towards young children. So the idea of professionalism is really only, how do I say this? Like, it's really only put on to white kids in the middle class.
You're right. It's oppressive. It's mad oppressive.
But yeah, I've noticed that as a white person, I've noticed it's a lot, while being like aware of this type of stuff. Like, what I'm trying to say is, when I first became like aware of Black issues, like early 2018, I started to notice more and more things. Like I started to notice more and more racist imagery. When you become more aware of these type of issues, you realize how embedded in society really everything is.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting situation when you recognize what privilege looked like for you growing up, and having to reckon with that. You know what I mean? There is this kind of cocoon that I think a lot of folks exist in until they quote unquote wake up, until they get woke. And woke is obviously such a corny term. It's so cheesy. It's so bad. But if you think about the imagery, if you think about the component of waking up, of this rebirth, there really is, this unpacking that you have to do. It's like, I've been on bullshit. My ancestors have been on bullshit. What do I do to reckon with this piece? And it's this, and I'm not religious by any stretch of the imagination, but I do believe it's this coming to Jesus moment where you like the book opens and all is illuminated and you're like, wow, the world sucks. Mama Audre Lorde said institutionalized rejection of difference is an absolute necessity in a profit economy, which requires outsiders to surplus people. And we have to celebrate our differences. We've got to celebrate the fact that we're outsiders, because I think that's the only way that we can hold true to any bit of humanity. With the how pervasive systemic racism is, it's just, what's next? You know, you see that it's got so many new faces, and it reemerges decade after decade in a completely different facade. So it's like, what's next?
Moving on a little bit from that, I was really wondering what really inspired you to write and perform poetry, and what are some poets that you look up to?
Yeah, so gosh, I've always been told that journaling is cathartic and it's something you need to do. And if you want to be a better person, so it's something that I've always had as a practice since my youth. And sometimes it's like nothing happened, and I just want to talk some shit, and I just want to like be me. So I'll write a 16. I'll write some poetry. I'll do whatever feels expressive in that moment. And I've done that since I learned how to write, since I knew what the written word was. But it wasn't until high school when I had a phenomenal poet. Her name is Tasha Jones. She was a great mentor and helped me get to New York. There was a competition called the NAACP ACTO program. And, you know, I participated the year before in Poetry Out Loud. And it was, you know, it's just explicit recitation. You read somebody else's work. And it's like, you know, I've got this theater background. I'm a thespian. I'm a theater geek at heart. So it's like, let me assign some energy and some emotion to this work that just almost feels a little bland. So I was in an English class, and I was getting ready for this Poetry Out Loud competition, and Tasha Jones was the mentor. And she said, you know what, you need to merge your love of theater with your love of the written word. Create your own shit, like do your own thing, spit it on the stage, and people will give you money. I said, say no more. I said, where's the check? And it really has just kind of blossomed into this beautiful thing that not only is it cathartic, not only is it something that I'm super passionate about, but it helps sustain me. It helps me live in this ridiculous society brought with white supremacy.
Theater was one of the biggest things that helped me out too, because for me, it was more of like an escape, because I could always play as a different character, somebody who I wanted to be. And a lot of these like spoken things like this, like theater, poetry, choir, band, all these arts, people say don't exactly matter, but when you could see the amount of people that they helped mentally and at a lot of times physically, because let's be clear, moving around on stage under bright ass lights is a sport.
It is. Oh my goodness, it is. I've been a theater kid since elementary school.
Same here.
Everybody's play, doing on everybody's stage, trying to really just speak my truth, a truth that I didn't really know existed. And so I got to live vicariously through those characters. But yo, it's a sport. I mean, football is nice, but there's nothing like having to make sure you're on book. You're fully memorized. You've got the blocking. If it's a musical, you better be able to sing. You better be able to use your diaphragm. It's a sport.
And also, whenever you have to wear giant costumes, those things fucking suck.
My junior year in high school at Broad Ripple, I was the lion in The Wiz. I was the Beano lion, and that was a hot ass costume. Would I do it again? The check needs a comma.
I was a bear. We did the Jungle Book, and I was Baloo the bear.
That's my favorite character. That's my favorite character. Baloo's dope.
Yeah, theater is like really cool because not only is it just like there's so many different ways for like not like ways, but there's so many different openings for creative expression, both through like the writing parts of it and the costume parts and the acting and everything. Like, but then arts are just really cool because like more often than not, it's like a mixing pot for diversity, way much more than other fields in my school that I remember.
That's right. It's diverse in ethnicity and gender, and also the artistry. Like you said, you got to paint the set, you got to build the set, you got to get somebody to choreograph what the actors are doing. It's a world in and of itself.
Yeah. Actually, on the note of like diversity and having like a lot of different people and influences, growing up in Indianapolis, a like large city where arts and stuff are very like prevalent, how has your experiences growing up there as a queer Black man impacted your career?
Yeah, that's it's an interesting question to unpack. I did not come out until 2011, and at that time I was 21. So the majority of my youth, I lived. A lie would be, that's not the best word to describe it, but essentially, I believe omission is a lie, and I omitted that part of myself subconsciously. I always knew that I had a queer state of being. I've always been peculiar across all facets of my life, and I knew very early on that I was attracted to men. And it wasn't until I was able to like kind of fly the coop, leave home, get and by leave home I mean like move a couple miles away in downtown Indianapolis, away from Fountain Square. So it's not like I made this massive leap across states, but being able to just kind of be an adult and have autonomy, it gave me the opportunity to really explore who I am, and I was able to come out in 2011 as a queer Black man who identifies as who just doesn't subscribe to the gender binary. So I use they them pronouns. I don't think I mentioned that at the beginning, but it's really, really interesting because the person that I was when I was omitting certain aspects of my life is not the person that I am now. And I think that speaks to the nature of what it means to walk in your truth and to be honest. Because when you're honest with yourself, everything just kind of falls into place.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly the greatest person when I was trying to, straighten myself out to fit in with the southern southern types of people that I lived with. No, I do agree with that. Living as your authentic self really does wonders. I feel so much happier, and I feel like I'm a much kinder person now that I'm actually being how I think I was meant to be.
See, I was easy with that. I was living my authentic self my entire life, but I just never put a label on it because I was 4. I didn't know what it was. The thing was, I used to steal my mom's boots all the time, so.
Same. My mom had some high heels, little dude, right before my feet grew too big for them. Look, I was strutting them always, okay? I was living my best life. So it's like my family knew, I knew, but I didn't make it clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Switching gears once again, what's your writing process? And we all know that you're a wonderful, very talented poet. I was wondering what you do to like get into the mindset to describe, just get into the mindset to create.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Thank you so much for those kind words. One of my love languages is words of affirmation, so please keep them coming. No, my writing process is interesting because I've got 2 modes of writing. The first mode is super laser focused. I've got a prompt. I've got an emotion that I want to convey. I've got a story that I want to tell. So I just go. And that process is like just paragraphs on paragraphs on paragraphs that eventually get whittled down to the most succinct words that fit. And as you can imagine, my writing process also involves my editing process, like they're one and the same. So it takes a while for me to write. But on the second hand, the muse is fleeting. And even when I've got that prompt, even when I'm ready to go, even when like I'm ready to go paragraph on paragraph and whittle it down to be as succinct as possible, the muse says, no, not today. It's literally, no, it's just not gonna happen. And it sucks. But to keep myself on task, to make sure that I assign this level of discipline, which has helped me in school as well, is I just start writing. I know what I want to say. I've got maybe a one-liner in my back pocket, and I form what I write around that. So it's a fun process, but it's like either I'm laser focused and I got it, or it takes me a moment.
I'm just wondering this: how do you not get writer's block? Because whenever I try and write it, I can't ever find the right words.
Writer's block is a really interesting term because it's something that you suffer from. And I use that word very intentionally. Not feeling the ability to just know the story that you want to tell, know the place that you want to take people to. Um, it's tough to just not be able to go to that space and be able to convey what that looks like. I don't suffer from writer's block as often, and I have, but I don't as often because I just write. Like I let the mediocre shit come out of my pen. I have, you should see
I love
my
that phrasing.
notebooks. It's like it's embarrassing when I die. Like let me do my will, because like my notes are like I already got chicken scratch handwriting. So like it's never a perfect kind of like, aha, here's my poem. It's like I'll have the idea and I'll create, and then I've got to whittle it down. And that process is not only fun because I get to see, I keep both versions. Like I might wind up, if my first published piece that's not in an anthology, I've done tons of anthologies, I haven't released my own work, but my first one might be a series of like the stuff that came unedited, and then like to show my edits on the next page and show what I was truly trying to convey. And doing that particular process that I have keeps writer's block away. It's like I just write. Like it's gonna look like, it's gonna look crazy. It's gonna sound like shit, but I'm just gonna write. And then you pick and choose what suits you, what you want to put out into the world, because writing's always got to be a cathartic process, unless it's academic. This may not apply to the academy, that doesn't always work. But for creative writing, that's always the process that I like to go first with.
Kind of like a trial and error.
Exactly. See what works, see what doesn't.
So then, if that's your like normal process, then how have the events of 2020 like affected that? Have they been like more helpful or more draining, or maybe like a mix of both?
I would say draining to the point of almost burnout, because while I've had this beautiful opportunity to work from home, and there's a level of privilege that I need to acknowledge in the middle of a pandemic and systemic indifference happening literally in America's thoroughfares. I've got this privilege of being able to just sit and to write and to just do. And I can clock in from into work, do the work that I know is necessary, clock out, and just do the fuck out of me and just write. What's great about it is that I get to let so much off my chest. And what's bad is, there are all of these virtual events, there are all of these meetings. I'm in the nonprofit art sector professionally. So I've sat in charrettes and meetings and lectures where people are wanting to pick a lot of Black folks' brain, so that it's been so draining to just be this almost anomaly in the nonprofit arts world that is almost explicitly white, almost explicitly straight, almost explicitly male. And then to have these nonprofit arts administrators at the high level, not necessarily wanting to assign monies behind my thoughts, just kind of picking my brain and well, Devon, what does it feel like to be, a Black theater artist not being able to perform? And what do you think about the Newfield's director stepping down? And how does this, affect you? These conversations are really, really draining. So as much free time as I've had to be able to create, it's like almost out of the window. Like the as emotional and connected as I feel to that work, like it's like nothing even happened, because I've got to give so much of myself to these nonprofit white arts organizations that want to be doing really, really, really good work. They want to, but they fail because of their racism and their systemic indifference.
2020 has been a really tough year for all of us, I think. But they've had like a lot of super important, it's had a lot of super important events. It's had a lot of super devastating events, but some super wonderful events. And I think there's a lot to write from there. I was wondering, in your work, what the most powerful poem to you, or just in general, that you think you've written, and if you don't mind elaborating on why, I think that would be.
So there is, to show you how ridiculous my process is, I've got notebooks. Oh no, I've got them tucked under my bed right now. To my right and to my left are just tons of books, and my library is great. What has been a great source of inspiration is just being able to read. That's another part of quarantine that's been great. I can just like sit and read immediately after I clock out of the office. And right before, I like to do it right before. And I think that's been affecting how I write. But I've got these notebooks from 2008. I've got these notebooks from elementary school full of ideas and pieces that can go in a specific direction. So I'm like, okay, let me catch up to where 11-year-old Devon was, because he was trying to make a point. The homie had something to say. And I will take those poems and rework them. I've got a ton of poems that I've reworked. And over quarantine, I've refined a poem that I competed with at the Southern Fried National Poetry Slam. And it was one that I had began in 2010, right before I came out as gay. And it essentially chronicles the life of this boy. And it's filled with like a lot of trigger warnings. And if you're interested in me reciting it, I want to let you know that it's wrought with Black death, internalized homophobia, bigotry. Like, it's got so many slurs from the perspective of the father. So it's heavy content, but it's become my favorite poem because I started it and it was no more than a minute long, and it occupied all of the page, and that's when it just sat in my journal, when it was just for me. And then I said, you know what? As I came out in 2011, and I said, okay, cool. I've got this poem. I knew where I was trying to go back then. Let me refine it with the queer person that I am today. And this is a Devon that still had so much trauma to unpack, had so many skeletons in his closet that needed to be unearthed. And I eventually came to refining it like after years for this one competition, and it is my favorite poem. It is called Boys Will Be Boys. And I've gotten some awards from it. It's powerful because when I read it, like it almost brings me to tears. It makes me unearth some of my own trauma, some of what I've experienced. But it's just such a joy to share, because each time I get to let it off of my chest, it moves me in such a way. All right.
And we probably should put a trigger warning at the very beginning of this episode.
And then also,
absolutely, please, because this is heavy stuff. So the content warning broadly, this poem contains curse words, anti-Blackness, homophobia, and self-harm and death. So please make this space as safe as possible for you. Go ahead and grab some water, and then we'll be right back. Okay.
As stated before, the poem you're about to hear may be triggering for some. If you do not wish to consume the content, please fast forward 3 minutes and 40 seconds to resume the podcast. Thank you.
This poem is dedicated to Nigel Shelby, the 15-year-old queer boy who took his life because he walked in his truth. Purple is my favorite color, and it must have been his too. He wore masculinity on his chest like stethoscope next to a heart-shaped pendant hanging from purple ribbon. You must be like me. I like those things. How he wears them openly astounds me, but with a missing leg, there's no earthly plane to travel, so he wears it proudly. 5 o'clock, shadow boxing the day away, I wanted to be like my father. With a cigar-clad mouth, they'd call me Jarhead, amongst the brave, to defend the free, in the last country on earth to use grand juries. Corrections Corporation of America, NGO Group, cash crop these bodies for free labor. The imperial land of the free is a militarized police state, more dangerous than any criminal on the street is a man with a badge, carte blanche, so brazen, so bold, so complicit in the law of the land without regard for the bodies that occupy it. Pops will be proud. Commandos and paramilitary outfit occupying all of America. Them boys will be boys, and these boys want to be Rambo, but Barbie was too big to fit in my pocket. And I outgrew my mother's heels. I've got infinity bones for days on a skeleton with no backbone. I am more burden-bodied than muscle-fucked, more person than daydream. I don't want noose-necked homo hanging in closeted compromise to be my legacy. The space between my lashes and our collective need to give a fuck left me broken and broke in. The space between my lashes and our collective need to give a fuck left me broken and broke in. Mirrors don't come with an instruction manual because mirrors don't come with an instruction manual, so I cursed my reflection because that's all I know. So I'll be a soldier just like him. They won't ask, I won't tell, and I'll make basic training my bitch so Pops will be proud. Proud of the fact that after fist fucking a pint of gin, his son won't be the fag of the family. He'll say that lipstick was an experimental phase between Barbie doll and razor blade, so don't judge my boy too harshly. Nigga trying to be Einstein, running through minefield fantasies because boys will be boys, but he's roughing it in the infantry now, like a man's man. He's got the Sahara Desert behind his ears in the middle of the sandbox playing Monopoly with Guantanamo logistics. He passes go on merit, nuts the size of boulders, bolting, bouncing babies at those belly dancing bitches. My boy was born to fight, trained to kill, ready to die and never will. It was just bravado and testosterone. The machismo of it all, merely a drag act, mask off, baby, it's me. Well, it was. Whatever I was afraid to lose was already lost until the enemy tossed that grenade like a life jacket 5. This symphony composition riddled with earthquake 4. Those days were too traumatic to flash broken bold in rhetoric. My darkest hour became the brightest 3. Seconds of my life, my emancipation is here, and I'll catch it with 2 long arms like the word masculine was tatted on my chest. 1. My father will frame my purple heart. 5 o'clock shadow box with my spirit in the backyard. I'm finally his boy.
Thank you. Wow. I don't even know what to say to that. Everything astounds me when you hear what people come up with. The fact that you were able to take those things from your mind and write them down with that much clarity, precision, and power is incredibly astonishing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, you know it's illegal to make a black man blush, right? Come on now.
Sorry.
Come on now.
That's.
Thank you. I appreciate your kind words, really.
Yeah. I mean, they're the truth. It's just, how can somebody have that much power inside them and get it out there for others to see?
What were you saying, Rose?
Oh, I was gonna try to say this before, but like things were already moving on. So, if when we're doing the editing of this, maybe if we could like insert a little bit, like if you're a listener and you think these things would be too triggering for you, like move to this point in the podcast. Because I feel like even though like most people probably are going to listen to it, if those topics like aren't comfortable, then having a place to move to might be helpful for some people.
Our editor's got that covered.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great accessibility point. A lot of the work that I do in nonprofit arts organizations is trying to make sure that they're accessible for folks, and closed captioning, all of that. That's super important. Definitely have that skip point because that's a tough poem. That shit's tough. Like but it's also real life. And as honest as it is, we want to make sure that we give safe space for everybody and their mama, everybody, their mama and their daddy and their uncle, because that's what we do. That's what it's all about.
So that poem was really powerful, and I know it must have not been easy for you to perform it for that first time. Was it ever hard for you to perform like any poem in general in front of the crowd? And if it was, do you have any techniques you use to get past it?
Yeah, I'm such a theater nerd. I've taken what I've learned through the theater arts and applied it to the oration, and it works beyond just poetry. It works for art presentations. It works for meetings. It works for meeting new people. Really, I mean, everything that I do, I try to make sure that I eliminate anxiety as much as possible, which is the reason why breathing is so important to me. But yes, that's just hard. You getting in front of people, you telling them your truth. That it never gets easy, but some of the techniques that I use to make it easy for myself, and you can't paint this with a broad brush, but it's somebody who suffers from anxiety, somebody who gets stage fright. I've used these techniques to just move forward, and it's been so beneficial. So the first thing that I do is I ground myself. I meditate. That is sometimes the deal sealer. Like it's like I'm good after that. If I am not super comfortable with the piece and I want to make sure that I'm fully good, I like to do theater warm-ups. And I try to do this before, like just in general broadly. But what some of these techniques that I do, it's a sentence and then you'll repeat that sentence, and every time you repeat the sentence it gets faster and faster and your cadence goes crazier. So it'll be something as simple as diction is done with the tip of the tongue and the teeth. Diction is done with the tip of the tongue and the teeth. Diction is done with the tip of the tongue and the teeth. Diction is done with the tip of the tongue, and it just goes crazier and crazier. And you can imagine a room with 50 kids trying to lead that exercise, and everybody's going wild. So I do that. If there's a green room, or if there's an alley and people are smoking, or whatever venue I'm at, I try to make space to do those types of exercises. I don't know if you watch Bob's Burgers. I'm a Bob's Burger freak.
Yeah.
So you, if I say Lana loves the llama, but the llama loves pajamas, does that sound familiar? Or Sally Struthers' other brothers or mother. Gene and Linda they were about to go and perform, and they were like, yo, we need to warm up. So they did these ridiculous warm-ups, and I took those and put them in my back pocket, and they served me as a 30-plus-year-old. But another thing that really serves me is if I mess up, I make it intentional. If I make a mistake, I give myself the grace to say, you know what, I'm human. I fuck up, and that's okay. It's okay to not be okay. That way, I can truly, truly divorce myself from any anxiety, like being in my head after the fact. Because I've had less than stellar performances. You know, as a slam poet, what I do is I go and compete, and I try to tell these stories and let these folks know exactly what I'm going through, exactly the story that I want to do. But they're looking for so much. They're looking for stage presence. They're looking for eye contact. They're looking for this, that, and the other. So I've worked in a way to use my theater techniques as leverage to just kind of execute those performances, but it's never easy. You're always going to get stage fright, but that's okay. That's the fun of it, because the stage fright turns into nervous jitters, which turns into excitement. And then if you're truly passionate about something, and if you're fully committed, like that's all she wrote. Literally, that's it. That's all you need.
So I was genuinely wondering, where you work as the visual art and entertainment curator at the historical Madam Walker Legacy Center. What is it like working there?
Yo, so I've been there since 2014 as a full-time staffer. I started it's like 2011 is a pivotal year. Maybe that's the title of the book I'm gonna write, 2011, because in 2010 I started an internship at the Walker, and it wrapped up in 2011. And that small bit of time told me, you know, this is the place that I want to save. This is the place that I want to work at. This is the place that I want to occupy. It's explicit with Black history, heritage, and culture. And I've been there again since 2014. Curating the visual art and entertainment programming it's definitely been interesting in a pandemic, but recently navigating the nonprofit industrial complex is a beast. And you know, there's so much red tape that comes with trying to succeed in those areas. And I'm just so grateful to not only work in a space that is historically Black and remains under Black ownership, regardless of what a lot of folks think, but the community there, it feels like family. My boss, her name is Mary Kelly. She's the director of operations, and she's like a work mom to me. I'm close with some of the folks on the board of directors, and I just think they're doing some amazing work. And I think there's always room for growth. So we'll see what happens with the Walker. But doing the job that I do is just so much fun, and it's good to be surrounded by all Black everything, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. In your poem dedicated to the wonderful Marsha P. Johnson, you pay your respects to her by using the title Queen. And in your interview with Stephen Lane, you call her your mama. Why do you use these titles, and why is it important to show this level of respect to Black LGBTQ figures in history?
Phenomenal question. Been waiting on this question for ages, because Marsha P. Johnson is an ancestor that I call to. She's an ancestor that I respect in my day-to-day and who I give thanks for. If it wasn't for Marsha, I wouldn't be able to be the queer affirming, non-binary Black man that you see before you. I just have to give thanks to her in every facet. But honestly, just like how in 2011, I was very skeptical of the difference between bigotry and systemic racism. I also had a lot of transphobia, a lot of homophobia, internalized homophobia to unpack. And I did my deep dive. I nerd out on shit like this. I love to research. I'm a history buff, and around that time, the movie Stonewall was coming out, and I had a loose understanding of what Stonewall was. But once I saw the uproar of folks wanting to denounce it because it centered whiteness, I said to myself, go look that shit up. Who the fuck was really moving and shaking back then? And I found Marsha P. Johnson, and she was just this wonderful human being that walked in her truth at a time where, like, how dare you? You know, in newspapers, people were being outed. You become a social pariah. So not only was she homosexual, she found herself in a space where she was gender nonconforming and wanting to express that by any means as a low socioeconomic, queer, trans, bisexual human being. You know, Marsha was broke. Marsha was a sex worker. Marsha made a way out of no way in this capitalistic society. So I have to give thanks to her in every single way. And the reason why I wrote that poem, one of my really good friends, Tatiana Rebel, asked myself and another good friend, Elle Roberts, to come together for this discussion of queer figures who are erased from history. So I was tasked with chronicling Marsha P. Johnson's life. And then we also discussed Bayard Rustin and another ancestor that I honor every day, Audre Lorde. So in preparation for me having to kind of tell Marsha's life, it's like, how dare I come and speak on behalf of this person that is gender nonconforming and who is such an amazing human being. I wrote a poem, and that poem informed my dialogue, and it informed the questions that I asked and answered in that panel. So that poem is so important to me still. I feel like if you are a poet, if you write poetry and you are queer, you got to have a queer anthem. And I don't know if Boys Will Be Boys is my queer anthem, or if Pay It No Mind, which is the name of the poem you reference, is my queer anthem.
Really quickly, I wanted to know, have you seen the Netflix documentary, The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson?
Yes, FNYPD, all them niggas is trifling. Give Marsha her damn justice.
We love that.
In real life. Like, pay up what you owe. The Star Children are watching. Like
on that note, I know that, like, you sort of touched on it just now, but also in that interview with Stephen Lane, you mentioned that Stonewall is very often whitewashed, which is really dumb to me, because I mean, like, it was literally started and done by trans women of color for the most part. Can you tell us how you feel about the erasure of Black history, influence, and contributions in queer history?
Yeah, so oftentimes history is told by the people who survive. We know that those who win the war, they get to tell everybody how they won and who they beat. And when you look at American history, like in its totality, you realize that not only is Black history hyper intertwined into the fabric of that history, but it was so prolific that folks decided, you know what? People can't know this, or they can't know the order that it happened, or they can't know who was involved. So they whitewashed these history books and made it to where people like me had to be in a grown adult in order to kind of unpack all of the bullshit that I was given. And not being able to tell Black stories with authenticity, with conviction, is something that makes me really nervous for the state of Hollywood. And while I'm hopeful, it's like we've got to be able to tell our own stories. We've got to be able to chronicle our own narratives, and to see how quickly it gets erased, to see how swiftly the true actors are no more. They're no names. They don't exist. It's heart wrenching, and it hasn't stopped. It won't stop, and it'll take a complete upheaval for it to quit because it's ingrained into the systems that we live in. Black history is American history, is Black history, is American history, is Black history. They are one and the same. And the fact that we get the shortest damn month in the year pisses me off.
Especially in winter. You can't do anything
It's
in
cold.
winter.
Yeah. Also, I was wondering, like, I personally feel like appropriation of Black culture in the LGBT community is a big issue. My like big example that like comes to mind first is like AAVE, because it's just like the only reason that's in our community at all is because there are Black people in our community. It's like not directly a part of our culture because it's LGBT culture. It's part of our culture because it's Black culture and there are Black people in our community. So like when I hear white people saying it's okay for me to use African American vernacular English because it's an LGBT thing, it's like, no, it's not, bitch. That's appropriation to like take it from Black people, erase its origins, and then claim it for yourself. And like that's always bothered me. And so like now that we're having conversations with people of color, I was wondering like maybe you could give more like insight and stuff on that kind of stuff, maybe. Sorry that wasn't worded good.
No, that you worded it perfectly. If you are not Black, if you are not of the diaspora, and you are using AAEV, whether you drop the N word or not, you a clown. Shame on you. Gross. That is ours, and it's not even something that we have to deal with or reckon with as it pertains to folks speaking and having conversations. Like, look at the emojis, look at the gifs or gifs, however you pronounce it. Look at how often people who aren't Black use Black women, specifically Black women, to tell their stories, to emote how they want. And it's embarrassing. If you're using AAEV, if you are not of the Black African diaspora, then like you are a clown, period.
Mm-hmm. It's just like, yeah, it's the thing I wanted to talk about. So, on a different note, in a speech you did about transparency, you mentioned at a point in it that you, at that point in time, could consider yourself a voice for the voiceless and discussed safe spaces. And that bit really, really stuck out to me because when me and my friends were making this podcast, two of our goals were to be able to be a voice for the voiceless and to make a safe space. So I was wondering if you had any advice on to how to better achieve these goals, maybe not necessarily just as a podcast, but like in general.
Yeah, so I do want to be clear. I've now divorced myself from the idea of wanting to be a voice for the voiceless. What I want to do is create a space where the voiceless have a platform where they're able to speak their truth, because nobody can tell a story like your own. You know what I mean? So try to operate in that particular vein, because as it can be problematic. It's got colonial vibes of just like, you know what, I am going to save you. I am your savior. I will fix you. And I want you to know you're not wrong in thinking that. Like it's noble AF to want to speak on behalf of those who can't speak. But how much more, how beautiful is it in general to just give a platform to people who can't speak, but in creating safe spaces. That's another vein that I haven't shifted because I've recognized how appropriate and how intentional and how heavily curated safe spaces are and should be. But I think there's also room, and I'm really curious in investigating what brave spaces look like and how you give people the space to say the uncomfortable things, to do and say the uncomfortable things that society deems peculiar, and it be okay. And it's not something that you have to reckon with in a negative way. This is a space just for you. So when it comes to creating a safe space, you want to make sure that everybody feels affirmed. You want to make sure that everybody feels welcome. You want to make sure that everybody who can't can. And when I say can't can, that means if I can't read, you're going to mail me some Braille. If I can't hear, you're going to give me closed captioning. Making spaces as accessible as possible breeds a safe space. But you also want to be real curious and explore brave spaces as well.
Okay, thank you. That was like really insightful.
Okay, so also on the same vein of that, in your speech on transparency, you quote that Paul Laurence Dunbar: "We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes," end quote. Why is transparency in conversation important? And do you feel like you still wear a mask? Or do you feel completely free to be yourself?
There's so much that comes with being a person in the margins in this society that it's like, can you ever truly be your full self? And in a lot of cases, it's unsafe for people to be their full selves. I mentioned in that speech, people are ready to put a bullet in the back of your head just for existing. And that's real. That's not conjecture. That's not hyperbole. That's like, people are ready to shoot you because you're different. And I've tried my best, and I'm still trying. It's still a process of completely divorcing myself of inauthenticity. I will go into a predominantly white institution and sit at their board and say, "How you what?" To say what it do, and be authentically myself, and not try to sugarcoat who I am, and to make space for me to make space for me to just be. Like, right, like we just want to we just want to be regular. We want to exist without conditions. And why should humans ever feel like they have to exist with conditions? It's because it's unsafe to do so. So I'm always curious and exploring walking in your authentic truth. So in a lot of ways, there's some layers to the mask that need to be peeled. There's some things that I still need to chip away. But for the most part, y'all about to get me. You're just gonna get Devon. And I'm in a place in my life where I'm comfortable enough to say that, because especially in not just the nonprofit arts world, but just in the workforce period, it's a privilege to be able to walk in your truth. And we've got to acknowledge that for what it is. I look at privilege as a tree branch, and it's like you might get the branch that faces the sun that rises, but you've got to also acknowledge the one that hits the sunset.
Okay. I just, sorry to go back, keep talking about the transparency one. You brought up the topic of toxic masculinity. I've heard a lot of people in my surroundings say that is a made-up thing. I wanted to know your thoughts on that thing. On that, I know it is awful.
Whoever is saying that, they are in denial, boo. They are in denial. I recognize that the masculine and the feminine, there's this duality, right? Mm-hmm. But if we look at spectrums and things that aren't linear, humans, period, based on nature versus nurture, can fall in any area. And I believe that for survival, historically, since the inception of the human being, the masculine has always played a role. The masculine has a place. The masculine exists. And same for the feminine. The feminine is divine. The feminine is necessary. Without the feminine, there is no feminine or masculine. And I I have to fully recognize that in pursuit of what's right, because humans are flawed historically, the masculine been on some bullshit. There's no other way to describe it. You know, wars often started from men. There's another conversation as it pertains to religion, which is Pandora's box. But it's like I like to find the common denominator in the ills of the world, and oftentimes in this kind of like pyramid stack of BS that we have to endure as humans and that we put up with as humans, masculine folk consistently been on that bullshit. and if you look at an onion and kind of the peeling of layers, there's so much that you can celebrate about masculinity. There's so much that you can love and appreciate about the masculine and about what is considered quote unquote male biologically or in the abstract or literally. And while it should be appreciated, we got to also look at systems of power. And I'm all about that anti-patriarchal life. So fuck the patriarchy, FYI. In case you were confused.
Yeah. Sorry to cut this short, but we don't have a lot of time left. But I wanted to say thank you for joining us. Gus, you are an amazing person to talk to. You're very, let's just say you're good at talking.
Thank you.
Because it didn't feel like you stuttered over any word, and I'd stutter over like 80.
I was fucking up left and right. You just ain't seen. I be fucking up on the regular, and it's okay. I am not perfect, but thank you so much for your kind words. That really does mean a lot. Never ever strive for perfection. I just want to throw that out there. Perfection is ludicrous. Who needs it? Just be you. Be your authentic self in real life, because that's what's going to help you survive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we do have a lot of questions left, and if you'd be okay with it, and if our audience would you be able to come back for a part 2?
Look, I got time. anytime that queer folk make a space for other queer folk and in such an affirming way like this podcast, I'm here for it. So I just want to give thanks for all of you for creating this platform that somebody like me can come up here and talk shit.
That's all we really do.
That's all it is.
Talk shit and inform.
But to be able to give me this platform, I'm appreciative of it, and I'm excited for the trajectory of the show. I'm really excited for what the next couple of episodes look like, and once you're done with season 1, what season 2 look like. So kudos to you all again for making the space and being dope.
Okay, so thank you again for coming in and talking with us, but thank you for tuning in. It means a lot to us all here. If you need someone to talk to, please look up the Trevor Project, Muncie Outreach, or the Suicide Hotline, which is 800-273-8255. We all here care about you, so please take care of yourself and just breathe. We will see you all in the next episode. Hello, everyone. Here at the Outcast Podcast, we like to take time to celebrate Black History Month by highlighting some key Black LGBTQ figures in history. We also want to shed light on Black LGBTQ culture and its significance in queer history. We would like to recognize James Arthur Baldwin, an American novelist. James was born on August 2nd, 1924, in Harlem, New York. He was an activist, which was shown in his work, which dealt with racial, sexual, and class distinctions in the Western society of the United States. An unfinished manuscript titled Remember This House was expanded and adapted for cinema as the Academy Award nominated documentary film, I Am Not Your Negro. Baldwin's protagonists are often, but not exclusively African American, while gay and bisexual men also frequently feature as protagonists in his literature. He sadly passed December 1st, 1984, from complications with stomach cancer. Let me leave you with one of his quotes. Love takes off the masks that we fear we cannot live without, and we know we cannot live within.
Audre Lorde, born February 18, 1934 in New York City, described herself as Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet. An influential woman in civil rights, she spent her time as a creator and as an activist addressing injustices of racism, sexism, classism, capitalism, and homophobia, as well as addressing the topic of intersectionality. As a child, she would express her emotions through quoting poetry, and as a teenager began to write her own. She would go on to attend multiple colleges as an adult, growing as a writer and further exploring and establishing her personal and artistic identity. In her personal life, she married a white gay man named Edwin Rollins in 1962, having 2 children until divorcing in 1970. When living in Mississippi in 1968, she met Frances Clayton, a white lesbian and professor of psychology, and the two became partners, staying together until Audre Lorde passed away due to cancer in 1992 at the age of 58. Though most well known for her poetry and other literary works, Lorde was also an activist. Some of her contributions include co-founding Kitchen Table, Woman of Color Press, the first U.S. publisher for women of color in 1980, helping to create the Women's Coalition of St. Croix in 1981, an organization made to assist women who survived sexual abuse and intimate partner violence, and also contributing to the establishment of the Sisterhood in Support of Sisters, SISA, in South Africa in the late 1980s to help Black women who were affected by apartheid and other injustice. She was also influential in regards to the Afro-German movement as a result of time spent in Berlin, Germany, in which she encouraged the use of language as a form of resistance and increased awareness of intersectionality across racial and ethnic lines. Her time in Germany and her work there has been highlighted in a documentary by Dagmar Schultz titled Audre Lorde, The Berlin Years, 1984 to 1992. Some of her famous literary works include Cables to Rage, 1970, that of which is also notable for the poem Martha, the first instance where Lorde solidifies her lesbian identity, The Cancer Journals, 1980, From a Land Where Other People Live, 1973, Coal, 1976, Sister Outsider, Essays and Speeches, 1984, and Zami, A New Spelling of My Name, 1982. Audre Lorde was an amazing, stunning woman, and even though she passed away, her influence still continues today as a result of her writing, activism, and through name in the Audre Lorde Project, an organization created in New York City after her death that continues today to help serve lesbian, gay, bisexual, two-spirit, trans, and gender nonconforming people of color and their communities. If you'd like more information on the Audre Lorde Project, you can find it at alp.org. To finish this section, I want to share a few memorable, powerful quotes from Lorde. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So, it is better to speak. Life is very short, and what we have to do must be done in the now.
Ball culture originated in the 1920s, but it was mostly whitewashed. Queens of color were expected to lighten their skin in order to participate. However, after the Stonewall riot, more queens of color migrated to the scene. Balls were compositions of mixed cross-dress performance. It consisted of events that mix dance, lip syncing, and modeling. Events are divided into various categories. Participants walk for prizes and trophies. Voguing also appeared in this time. You might recognize the term from the popular show RuPaul's Drag Race. Voguing was a popular move adapted from the Madonna song, and it was used to replicate model poses from the magazine Vogue. It was a counterculture phenomenon. Ball culture is rooted in defiance against the police raids on gay bars beginning in the late 19th century. Houses serve as affirmative families, primarily consisting of Black and Latino LGBT individuals. They were meant to provide shelter and safety for those who have often been kicked out of their homes. Houses are led by mothers and fathers who are usually older members of the ballroom scene. They are typically drag queens, gay men, or transgender women. They provide support for their house children. Some notable houses from this time are the House of Ebony, the House of Extravaganza, the House of Princess, the House of Infinity, and the House of Mizrahi. The HIV/AIDS epidemic took and continues to take the lives of many ball participants. Its trauma has caused the community to grow tighter as the members mourned. They celebrated the lives of their friends together. We here at the Outcast podcast believe that Black history is queer history,